Welcome to our online lecture of supply and demand. We're been analyzing markets. In a previous lecture, we started discussing the non-price determinants of supply. So ceteris paribus, other things being equal, the most important determinant of quantity supplied is the price in the market. But now we're trying to analyze what would happen if something other than price changed, the non-price determinants of supply. And there are 6 of these. We'll bring these up on the right-hand side, and then we'll discuss them. Right? And we'll say, okay, how could a change or an altercation or something in the market to any one of these 6 affect the supply curve, shift the supply curve to the right? Because remember, any increase in a curve will be a rightward shift, any decrease in a curve will be a leftward shift. So in this case, imagine we start at supply curve S, and we're asking what would shift the curve to the right to supply curve S1. So first, let's analyze input costs. Now remember, inputs are synonymous with resources or factors of production. So what would happen with the price of resources or factors of production or inputs which would cause supply to increase? So imagine if we are the farmer. In this case, we're the producer of corn. Well, let's just randomly pick one input, one factor of production, one resource. Let's say fertilizer. If all farmers need fertilizer, well, if the price of fertilizer were to come down, a necessary input, this would cause the supply curve to shift to the right and increase in supply. And this is going to be true with any resource or input. If there's a decrease in the price of that resource, the supply curve will shift to the right. How about technology? Well, imagine if some amazingly intelligent botanist working at Cal Berkeley or Northwestern comes up with a new strain or a new strand of corn which is much more weather resistant. It doesn't matter if it gets super hot out or we suffer a severe drought or there's too much rain, that this corn is very resilient to radical changes in weather. That new technology, how would that affect the market for corn? How would that affect the supply here? Well, that's going to shift the curve to the right again. An increase in technology will shift the supply curve to the right. And this is going to be true for any improvements in technology will shift the supply of that market curve to the right, the supply curve to the right. Taxes and subsidies, we'll take these one at a time. Taxes. If we decrease taxes on producers, that will increase supply. If we decrease the taxes, if we lower taxes, that will increase supply. There's an old adage among economists that if you want more of something, tax it less. If you want less of something, tax it more. So decreasing taxes increases supply, shifts the curve from S to S1. Now, what are subsidies? We went over this in a previous lecture, but it's probably a good idea to review. Subsidies this occurs when the government actually takes tax revenues generated from other sources, whether it's corporate taxes or personal income taxes or excise taxes, and they hand it out to producers. So you can think of it as taxes in reverse. And say, well, why would the government do this? Are they favoring one industry or one corporation over another? Well, typically this happens in infant industries to try to get them into a situation where they're more competitive. So for instance, the solar energy industry. Right now, solar energy producers are receiving large government subsidies. So this would increase the supply curve, the supply of solar energy from S to S1. The supply curve would shift to the right, so we'd have a change in supply. Right? And we'll talk about it in a later lecture. We'll analyze this in much more detail. Say, okay, well, what are the effects of government subsidies on markets, and why would governments ultimately subsidize producers? And we'll look and say, okay, once we bring supply and demand together and we start talking about equilibrium price and quantity, we can see in a more definitive manner why subsidies might be a good idea for industries that are otherwise not competitive. Number of producers is very simple. Right? If there's an increase in the number of producers, the supply curve will shift to the right. Right? So in the infancy of our World Wide Web, the internet, there wasn't very many people with web pages. Then all of a sudden, all these businesses and corporations and even like small mom and pop shops, they all wanted web pages. So there was an obvious increase in the number of web designers. So there's an increase in the number of producers. That would shift the supply curve from S to S1, an increase in supply, change in supply. All right, now prices of other goods. What if a manufacturer can quickly and easily, efficiently change production from one type of good to another good? So for instance, if a farmer is able to allocate some of his or her land and that they have for the farm, both to producing a product, say like corn and like soy. So if we're analyzing the market for soy, so it's important we identify which market we're analyzing. So SOY, soy. If we analyze the market for soy, what happens if producers expect the price of this agricultural product to increase? Well, they're going to probably shift more resources into producing that particular product. That would shift the supply curve to the right. All right. Expectations. This one probably has the least amount of application. But if producers expect lower prices in the future, they might increase supply today. And then the only practical example that's ever used for this particular non-price determinant of supply and causing an increase. Imagine if you're a jewelry store and you expect the price of gold to go down in the future. You might increase the supply of what you have for sale today. All right, let's start talking about what might decrease the supply curve. So in the previous slide, we talked about how the non-price determinants of supply would increase supply. We're going to look at the same 6 non-price determinants of supply, but we'll talk about how they would decrease supply, shift the supply curve to the left. So a change in supply caused by one of these non-price determinants. Well, if a decrease in the price of resources increases supply, then any increase in the price of an input, a factor of production, or a resource will decrease supply. So in the last slide, we talked about the change in the price of fertilizer and a decrease in supply. We'll assume the price of fertilizer goes up this time. Well, that would shift the supply curve to the left. So anytime a producer must pay more for a necessary resource, this will decrease supply, leftward shift in supply from S to S1. Now, it's difficult to come up with an example of a negative technology, but there could be a time where there's a temporary disruption to technology. So, for instance, if there's a power outage in a city, many computers and other obvious machines that need electricity to run, a temporary disruption of technology, that could cause a temporary decrease in supply. But, typically we talk about increases in technology, but there could be a disruption in technology. Taxes and subsidies. If we increase taxes on producers, this will shift the supply curve to the left, decrease supply. If we decrease subsidies, this will shift the supply curve to the left, decrease supply. Now you might ask yourself, why would the government decrease subsidies? We're going to go over some examples of this. We'll look at the education market, and again in the previous slide we talked about solar energy, so maybe in the future the solar energy might not need government subsidies in order to be competitive. So decreases in subsidies shift supply curve to the left. All right, a decrease in the number of producers likewise will shift the curve to the left. It's a straightforward one. All right, prices of other goods. So again, that farmer, we talked about soy in the last slide. If the farmer expects the price of corn to be higher, well, the farmer can obviously plant some corn and some soy. What would happen to the supply of soy if the manufacturer of soy assumes that corn prices might be higher? Well, there's going to be a decrease in the price of soy. And then expectations. Again, thinking of that jeweler, if the seller assumes that prices would be higher in the future, expectations of future prices, they might withhold some supply, some of the goods they have for sale today. So if you are the jeweler and you expect that a year from now or 6 months from now that the price of gold would be skyrocketing, you might make less available for sale today.